afternoon. Thank you for coming out and supporting the Tea Party, and thank you for being a patriotic American and supporting our country. We are asking people to sign a rolling petition in support of Senate Concurrent Resolution 1615, which is a resolution seeking the enforcement of the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is a part of the Bill of Rights. When the Constitution was written, it did not contain a Bill of Rights, which alarmed many of the Founding Fathers, causing them not to support ratification of the Constitution. When the supporters of the Constitution promised to add a Bill of Rights, those who opposed to it agreed to support the ratification of the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is extremely important as it declares to the federal government what it cannot do. The 10th Amendment states, and I quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. We the people in the Constitution," I get this, "we the people in the Constitution granted," I repeat, granted to the federal government few and defined powers. We created the government, they didn't create us, and we gave them certain defined and limited powers. Our Founding Fathers envisioned a balance of power between the federal and state governments. Almost since the ratification of the Constitution, the federal government has been encroaching on our rights and on the rights of the states, and is presently far beyond its few and defined powers. The 20 states, including Kansas, seeking to pass resolutions calling for enforcement of the 10th Amendment recognize that the federal government has usurped powers not granted to it, and in so doing have upset the balance of power and threatened to relegate the states into slavery through intimidation, fines, or blackmail. It's time we, the people, and the states demand the federal government stop usurping powers not granted to it and return to the limited and defined powers granted by the Constitution. In Federalist Paper number 45, it states, and I quote, "The powers granted to the federal government will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce." Furthermore, in Federalist Paper 45, it says, and I quote, "The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger. The operations of the state government will be most extensive and important in times of peace and security." Our Founding Fathers envisioned the federal government's role primarily protecting us from external threats, and our state governments protecting us internally and securing to each citizen his right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We, the members of the Salina Tea Party, see the need for the Senate Concurrent Resolution 1615 and are therefore seeking to educate the public about the 10th Amendment and asking them to sign a petition encouraging our state lawmakers to pass SCR 1615, placing the federal government on notice that it is in violation of its constitutional, defined, and limited powers. In the introduction to the Federalist Papers, says, Mr. Hamilton was in favor of a national government. Now, our Founding Fathers did not give us a national government. They gave us a federal government, and there's a very big difference there. Mr. Hamilton wished in the way of a greater national power, and that is what others feared. This was especially true in Virginia, where the Constitution was ably defended and as ably opposed. In his letters of the federal farmer, Richard Henry Lee, author of the resolution of June 7, 1776, calling for independence from Great Britain, asserted that the proposed government was not federal in its principles at all, but it was calculated ultimately to make the states one consolidated government. He said there is no assurance that the powers not assigned to the federal government would in fact be reserved to the states and the people. It took the 10th Amendment to settle this question beyond peradventure of doubt. So our founding fathers, including this gentleman, Mr. Lee, said, hey, this Constitution is making a national government which consolidates all the state governments into one. We don't want that. We want the states to be independent, and we want a federal government, which doesn't combine them all into one. Because of that, he and several others of the founding fathers said, we're not going to support ratification of the Constitution. So those who were trying to get the Constitution ratified said, tell you what, if we add a Bill of Rights, will you support it? He said, yes, I will. Thank God these men were wise enough to make sure they added a Bill of Rights to our Constitution. And speaking of our Bill of Rights, that would be the first 10 amendments. Amendment number 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I am sure glad they put that in our Constitution.
Hallelujah!
Now, what does it mean when it says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof? Well, what happens when you have a state church? The state tells the church what to preach, right? So the pastors preach from the pulpit what the state wants. And we only hear one thing. That amendment was not put in there to keep religion out of government. It was put in there so that our pastors could preach freely from the pulpit and tell us what they needed to tell us. So please tell your pastors to attend an educational event we have coming up so they can learn more about it, and not to be scared of the government, to preach from the pulpit what they need to preach about our government and about those who are running for office. I'm also glad they put in the First Amendment, because without it, we would not necessarily be unafraid to be here today assembling and talking against our government. But because that First Amendment is in there, we have the right, and we can tell the government, you don't have the right to stop us of assembling together and talking about what's wrong with our government and trying to figure out something to do to fix it. The First Amendment is all about enabling us to speak freely about a government that is usurping powers and to take those powers back that we did not grant to it. And that's what we need to do, and that's what we're after. So there are those who said to those who were opposing the Constitution, we don't need a Bill of Rights, that's common sense. Everybody knows that. No, it's not. And I'm thankful that we had some founding fathers who were smart enough and wise enough to come up with the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, and stick it in there so that we could have those rights defined and be able to use those today to roll back the usurpation of powers by our government. And that's what this whole resolution is about the 10th and 9th and 10th Amendment, is the government, federal government, has become a national government instead of a federal government, and is trying to be the government of the country instead of allowing the states to be sovereign. And we need to use that 9th and 10th Amendment to push back and get the government, federal government, back where in its limited and defined areas it is supposed to be. So if you haven't signed the petition, please do so. And if you can help us in any of these events we have coming up in Longford and in Chapman and in Russell, please contact Joe Winship. Joe, where are you at?
Thank you.
Contact Joe, contact myself, contact Clark, and we'll get you a hold of somebody that will help you get involved and help us. We can't two or three of us can't do all these things, and we need people to help us. So if you can help us in Russell, or you can help us in Longford or somewhere else, please get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Charles Romm.